Hi, my name is Terry Pearson, and today I'm going to be reading a story from my new book, No More Days. No More Days is now available on Amazon. Please find the link for it and other horror content on my page, Something Spooky. Today I'm going to be reading Bad Brew. Tony Cockrell had brewed beer his whole life. As a kid, he had helped his dad with his home brew in the basement. He recognized now that it was a sort of amber lager, a light beer with a darker color, but he doubted his dad knew that at the time. It was just the beer that happened to be made from whatever barley, malt, and yeast his dad had access to, and he probably never made the same beer twice. When he was in college, he started brewing beer with his friend Anthony Fritz, who also went by Tony. Tony didn't know any other Tonys, so the fact that the one he did was his best friend who also brewed beer was no small coincidence. By the time Anthony graduated, Tony had dropped out of school to start his own brewery, simply called Tony's, which Anthony helped open. When Anthony moved out west to utilize his degree in California, the land of crapportunity, Tony had liked to tell him, Tony bought out his friend's stake in the business and single-handedly owned the most acclaimed craft brewery in northwest New Jersey. His father had left the family while he was in high school and moved to Mexico to be with who his mom called one of his mistresses. Tony had hardly talked to him since then, the occasional phone call or birthday card, but still often thought about the old man when he was locking up the place at night. On his 35th birthday, alone in the world outside of his two dogs, Bud and Miller, and his mom, who had moved to Atlantic City, Tony tapped a special brew he had been concocting for months. He called it Zombie Suds in tribute to the movie Return of the Living Dead, the tape of which he had kept so long from Blockbuster that he now owned it. He had planned a release party the next night, but it was customary for him to sample the new stock before it went out. Something went wrong, or terribly right, thematically speaking, and the beer dropped Tony dead before he finished the glass. Maybe it was how morose he was in the brewing process, thinking about how lonely he was and how pointless his efforts were in making it, and all that sorrow and self-pity sunk into the mix and poisoned it. Or maybe it was the burlap sack of mystery ingredients he poured into the batch when he was tweaking it, while already beyond hammered one night. In any case, his head slouched and his heart stopped, the frosty mug still gripped in his hand. But then, although his heart had stopped for more than 8 hours overnight, he awoke the next morning as the living dead, still holding the glass. A miracle of science and branding, Tony's Zombie Suds had transformed him into the undead. He didn't feel much different, but knew he was dead, on account of his cold blue skin, lack of pulse, and horrible hankering for brains. He was also very thirsty and possessed an unshakable urge to turn others into zombies. So after finishing the glass that killed him, and pouring another and finishing that one too, he made no attempt to call off the night's release party. He was in fact quite looking forward to it, and could think of no better way to turn a great number of other people into zombies too. A happy birthday, indeed. That evening, as business began to pour in, no one questioned Tony's appearance. They all assumed he had dressed up for the party, which was a reasonable hypothesis considering the graveyard decor for the occasion, the Romero movies playing on a projector screen, and Michael Jackson's Thriller on a repeating loop over the speakers. Even as Tony's speech began to slur and diminish to moans, everyone just guessed he was drunk. The big tapping had been saved for 7 p.m. sharp. Zombie hour, the chalkboard above the bar read, with a hasty graveyard sketch in pastel colors underneath. The bar was packed. New beers at Tony's were always an event, and there had been extra buzz about this one. As the hour drew nearer, Tony became unconvinced he could make it through on an empty stomach and ate one of the bartenders in the back staff room. As the clock struck, the remaining 2 bartenders cheered the hour with the raucous crowd that had gathered. The suds started pouring, and soon every glass in the place was filled with the thick black liquid. People clinked glasses, toasted one another and George Romero, and some even drank fast enough to order another round before everyone in the establishment dropped dead, almost at the same time. At this point, Tony had time to kill, and not much else left to accomplish. He stood behind the bar and drank more brew while watching the rather abysmal Survival of the Dead, cursing himself for not just sticking to Romero's original trilogy. He wasn't sure what the plan was when people started waking up, but imagined they would all also have the same urge to create more zombies, and figured that would take up some time at least. Then, as he went to pour his 5th or 6th glass, the front door opened with the clink of a bell. Stupidly, maybe because of his dead brain, Tony hadn't considered this possibility and spun around in surprise. There, turning pale with horror at the gruesome scene, was Anthony. His mouth literally hung open as his eyes rolled over the corpses piled up around the building. His California tan evaporated, and he was dripping sweat within seconds. Finally, locking eyes with Tony, he couldn't find the words, and his lips moved silently. Tony looked at his old friend for a long time, the mug of Zombie Suds shaking in his hand. At last, he raised it in salute and tried to say, "I told you you should have stayed." That was Bad Brew from No More Days. Please find it on Amazon. Thank you so much.